I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem!
I know a lot of fucking idiots that think a lot of shit is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is it takes things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Welcome, everybody, to Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. Today, I am pleased to introduce you to Lenny Bruce, who we will get to in a moment, coming to you live from Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Lovely vaulted podcast. Craig, Mike, Matt with me. Hello, gentlemen.
Yo. Hello. Hello.
Going smoothly this time. This is the third episode we're recording today. I think everything's going well. And I'm excited about this episode because it's the first one we've done that I knew before researching the episode. I knew virtually nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. I know the influence that Lenny Bruce had on comedy. That's about it. And I know his character in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, who it turns out, I like the show Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but they make him a real folksy, hey there, dame, I say a few curse words and they throw me in jail. He was a bit of a rascal, this Lenny Bruce. He was a bit of a troublemaker, an agitator, you might say. Yeah. So he's actually a very wild guy. Lenny Bruce is a guy who, he was ranked by Rolling Stone magazine the third greatest comic ever, behind Pryor and Carlin, or Carlin and Pryor, I'm not sure which order. Which I always, you look at that, and as a kid born in 1991, I always thought that was they're paying homage to a guy that was great at the start of stand-up. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? He was the best then, so they just kind of throw him a bone by saying he's one of the greatest ever.
Better than Henny Youngman.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. But through researching this episode, I found, a lot of his material doesn't necessarily hold up. He has a very 1950s way of speaking, daddy-o. And he, a lot of that doesn't hold up necessarily, but what he did for comedy is tremendous. And we'll talk about that, obviously, but we'll start right at the beginning. He was born Leonard Alfred Schneider, which I always just assumed Bruce was his middle name or something. I don't know where that name comes from, but he was born in Long Island to a shoe clerk. His dad was a shoe clerk, and his mother was a dancer. She was a performer.
What is a shoe clerk?
I assumed a guy. I thought you guys would know. I don't know. I assumed a guy that sold shoes.
The guy behind the counter in the bowling alley?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe he checked shoes. I'm not sure. But whatever he is, he was a bit of a deadbeat, it sounds like. So him and his father were not close, although Lenny went to live with his father. His parents got divorced when they were 8, and he lived with the mother for a little bit, but kid was kind of cramping her style. Her mom, like I said, was a performer. And, having a kid was kind of a pain in the ass if you wanted to make it in showbiz. So she dropped him off at the old man's house and said, see you later, kid. And that was very tough on Lenny because evidently him and his mother were very close. And, I can imagine that had an impact on things we'll talk about later. Although later in his life, they were close again, eventually. But when he was a kid, he moved in with his dad. They had their falling out, I guess. I don't know how much his dad was around. They didn't have a very good relationship. And he left, and in my notes I put that he moved in with relatives on a farm. I don't think he was related to these people. It was just a couple that took him in as a kid, and he started working on their farm till he was 16, which is, again, when we talked about Norman Lear. And I mean, we're going to get into a lot more about Lenny's fucking wildlife, but already we're at age 16. And when we mentioned Norman Lear, we kind of talked about how he said that the difference between writers now and writers then is writers back then lived a life and draw from their experiences. Writers now grew up on television and draw from what they saw on TV.
Right. Which
is why you got to get a lot of, sitcom staples and tropes that are on throughout that are on 15 different television shows. Mm-hmm. That's because we all grew up on TV, so that's our experience. That's what we know. Lenny lived a fucking life. And then when he was 16, he joined the Navy and fought in World War II. which I don't know. I didn't look enough into the law at this. You might know this, Mike, or might not.
I don't think so.
Here we go.
He joined the Navy when he was 16. I don't know if he had to forge his records.
He probably did.
Or if you could just do that at that time.
You could get waived in
Okay.
by your parents, I think. But I think that might have been 7. They were looking for people at 17, and
Okay.
you could waive in as early as 16.
So yeah, imagine
Didn't seem like the mom really cared for him though.
the mama wasn't too worried about it. She would have signed that away, no problem.
Guaranteed war? Yeah, why don't you go?
Yeah.
But
Either way, my problems are over.
but yeah, speaking of that voice, by the way, Lenny Bruce is evidence that that was pretty real. It wasn't that's how people talked back then, I guess.
It's very funny.
Which we'll hear in a bit. But he he served in World War II, which is again to speak to the difference. Imagine a 16-year-old now. There's so many stories in the news where something happens to a 22-year-old, and we're like, they're just a kid.
Yeah.
Imagine a 16-year-old serving in one of the most gruesome wars ever, if not the most. I don't know.
But back then, though, kids were not pampered like we were.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Second
it's wild.
most gruesome, I think.
Yeah, they were
Second one?
hardier.
World War I was a little rougher.
Okay.
Civil War.
Yeah. So Lenny had some wild times in the Navy.
Apparently.
Where his comedy career started pretty early. He performed for the boys. The boys need a little entertainment.
Yeah.
So Lenny threw on a dress, got on stage, and did a drag show. I guess he performed comedy in a dress. I assume the material may have had something to do with that.
Chappelle would be disappointed.
Yeah. Although it would be great. It'd be great if it had nothing to do with that. It'd be great if he never mentioned it.
Just a non sequitur.
but yeah, so Lenny was for the trans community long before our generation. Now,
So he was laughing with him, not at him.
well, he was, but it did not sit well with the Navy men. His commanding officers did not care for this. I guess they gave Lenny a good dressing down and sent him
After
to.
he got dressed up.
Yes, that's right. So they sent him to whatever form of counseling they have or whatever, and so I guess to fuck with this guy, he just convinced him he was experiencing homosexual tendencies and urges. He's like, I don't know, I guess I'm gay. So he convinced them that he was a homosexual, which at that time, I'm surprised they didn't throw him in jail.
So he broke the don't tell part.
He certainly did. Oh, he told.
Oh, that was focused on highly.
He told with vigor, and he was dishonorably discharged. And he appealed that. He fought that, I guess.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And because he didn't want to be dishonorably discharged.
No,
so he said, "Hey, come on, not so fast."
Yeah.
And the Navy gave in to him. But my favorite part of the description, they're like, "All right, it's not a dishonorable discharge, but we're at least going to say that you are unsuitable. We're not going to allow you gays anywhere near the Navy."
We've got it bad. We got a stigma bad enough as it is.
So it was like an honorable discharge with qualities unsuitable for the Navy or something like that.
In the Navy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Seemed to fit right in there.
So I thought that was great.
They didn't want him to be a seaman.
They certainly didn't.
Just swallows it.
So Lenny left the Navy, came back to perform comedy. I'm bouncing all around, but keep me in line here, Matt. Where are we?
And then he was heavily influenced by comedian Joe Ankus.
Oh yeah, so he met this Joe Ankus or Antrus. I'm not sure who he is, but I just threw it in there. I've never heard his name in my entire life, but I figured we should at least pay some sort of tribute to him because Lenny himself, even later in life, said this is the guy who kind of helped shape Lenny Bruce and got him into making social commentary and that sort of thing. Where if you know who this Joe Antrus is, you would say, oh, the obvious influence there. But when Lenny started, he was like every other act at that time. He was doing impressions. Mm-hmm. He was doing, my mother-in-law jokes. So he was kind of, a hack, essentially.
The whole time he was doing his stand-up, he'd have an instrument in his hand.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I was going to say, never mind. He was not doing an Al Jolson act, as far as I know. But it was just as stereotypical as everything else at that time. Take my wife, please. That sort of shit. But then he wasn't really getting work at those kind of places. He started getting work at, strip clubs. That's the kind of seedy environments he was passed at and was allowed to play at. And that kind of helped him, I guess, feel more comfortable in doing more socially relevant material and cursing.
Risque.
Yes, risque. Things that you were not allowed to do at the time.
Leno's got a bunch of stories about doing shows in strip clubs.
I mean, comedians still do it now to this day.
I mean,
But
like, what is that? Ari Shafir's show?
this is not happening.
This is not happening. Yeah, that's in a strip club.
Yeah, but that's Ari doing that.
I know, but I'm just saying.
It's wacky.
But
He's not doing
because
it
of
in
that.
between titty
Yeah.
dances.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so to show you like comedians do it now that are probably at the same level that Lenny Bruce was. That's got to be an awful gig, by the way. imagine being an audience member. Just want.
I know you lose
it's a
your bone,
lonely
you lose
evening.
your erection.
Yeah, it's a lonely. You want to see some tits and ass, and you got do you believe this president, Vice President Nixon? This guy's unbelievable. It's like, all right, funny boy, come on, get off the fucking stage.
It's crazy how long ago Lenny Bruce was and how everyone uses him as an influence.
Well, I'll tell you the crazier part is that he was born in 1925. So realistically, he could be alive. We talked about Norman Lear's older than Lenny Bruce, which is pretty fucking wild. But because of when he passed, which we'll get to, no one our age, unless you're a diehard comedy fan, you've never heard Lenny. You might have heard the name, and maybe you've watched Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but you don't really know who fucking Lenny Bruce is.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't know his material, which, by the way, I don't know if this is one of his more socially relevant clips. When I was looking through some of his material, I was looking for the stuff that pertained to our, kind of biography on him. But there was a clip called something like telling your colored friends how to act at parties. I was like, well, the guy was progressive, but it was a different time, you know?
At least he said friends.
Yes, that's so
You didn't pull that one, huh?
well, that's the funny thing too that we'll get to is Lenny for that time would be considered like
Yeah.
probably woke, I guess. You know what I mean? Like he was probably a hippie back in those days.
Yeah.
But
He
like
was a cross-dresser and a friend of the blacks.
that's right, yes. But he did also have his demons. So first of all, his mother let him MC for this is when he got back in touch with his mother. He would MC her like dance shows.
Which strip club?
He'd get a few yucks. See, I don't know. They did not say stripper. I don't know whether she was or not. I think it was a burlesque dancer, which I don't know how. I don't know how
So she was a fat stripper.
I don't know how close that was in those days. But I don't know. I don't know what Mrs. Bruce was doing or Mrs. Marlowe. I forget what her last name was. But so that's where we got to start. Lenny's first paid gig was $12 and a plate of spaghetti. Spaghetti dinner, which we talk about in the Mitzi Shore episode. $12 is pretty righteous bucks for those days.
Yeah, back in the day.
Like the Comedy Store, after a strike, paid people $15. So for your first gig to be 12 and a spaghetti dinner, that's not too bad.
Didn't feed him.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Back then, spaghetti was a weird thing. Not everybody got.
Yeah. Although I think they probably drank for free in those days.
Oh, I'm
And I'm
sure.
sure it was flying off the shelf at the Comedy Store.
What year was it?
47.
Oh,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Because I was like, wait a minute. All right, it was after. Because I was thinking I was like Prohibition, but I was like, oh no, it was after World War II.
Yeah.
Stupid.
I was born during Prohibition. So what do we have next, Matt?
Early in his career, he was a writer.
Yeah, so Shecky Green, who was friends with Lenny Bruce, said that
Up everywhere today.
if Lenny didn't go down this road of comedy, like if getting banned places and things like that, or if getting kicked out of clubs and things influenced him to become a writer, he said he would have been one of the more prominent film writers. But he kind of got drawn to this world of kind of the seedy underbelly of comedy at the time. And so he stuck with comedy a little more. But he was writing shows and movies, never had a lot of success with that. He wrote a movie that his wife and mother were in, and like that didn't. I think that got made at least.
Didn't pan out.
But he wrote a few films that like never made it anywhere. He was not a very successful writer, and he met Honey Harlow, his wife, who was a stripper, that's why I'm not sure if the mother was because they were very like in everything I read, they were very upfront about the wife being a stripper.
Every name in this story
Honey Hollow.
has been fantastic.
Right?
Like every single one.
Lenny Bruce is like a stereotype of the 1940s.
Yeah. He's the original Scarface.
Yeah. So him and Honey Harlow get together, and there was a lot here to unpack.
It sounds like they were the Ed and Nancy of the 40s.
This was like when I was
Sid and Nancy. Sorry.
when I was doing my research,
Ed.
I was like, I don't know if there's enough to talk about with Lenny Bruce. And when I got here, I was like, this will be easy. So Lenny and Honey get together, and they have a tumultuous relationship. First of all, Lenny hated that she was a stripper. I'm sure he loved it at first, but eventually hated that she was a stripper.
That's how they met.
And would try and I guess she had a singing career and was from what people said was not a bad singer, but that never really took off as much as Lenny tried to push it. He would try and get her out of stripping, but they were both heavily influenced by drugs. I think even the movie they did together was about like a stripper club owner relationship or something like that.
Real beatnik shit.
Yeah, but so he gets into he marries a stripper and gets into this world of jazz. He was big, like a lot of his friends were in the jazz community, and then that leads to
Those were his friends.
yeah. Well, he may have gotten a few things from him.
Well,
So Lenny was big into, among other things, heroin, methamphetamines, and Dilaudid, which I don't know what Dilaudid.
Dilaudid.
Do you?
I think that's heroin. It's
Oh,
like
so
a
it's just another
heroin
form of
type
heroin?
thing.
Isn't it
yeah.
a pill?
Yeah, it's
I'm not
like
sure.
it's a painkiller. That gives
So same type of shit.
surgery.
Same type of shit. And I guess liquid amphetamines were his big go-to. It all sounds very. But what's amazing about Lenny Bruce, and I brought this up.
Cup of really strong coffee.
Yeah, I brought this up in a previous episode. But the thing about Lenny Bruce is, like he has 6 albums that came out during his life. Like I said, his movies never got made.
Mm-hmm.
He performed on radio early in his career, but not much. Like I think the Arthur Godfrey show or something might have been on radio. I'm not sure if that was TV or radio, but that's kind of where he got his start. But he was only on television 6 times total in his career. So there's not a lot of Lenny Bruce out there. You know, like more of his stand-up came out after he died and things like that. But there's not a lot of like the reference I used was Artie Lang.
Yeah.
Where Artie Lang has kind of the misfortune of making it into his 50s now. Where there's so much on it. He was on radio every day.
Yeah.
He's done podcasts and stand-up and movies and shit like that. Where at a certain point you're like, oh, this is sad. Like you'll hear Artie repeat himself and shit like that.
Yeah.
But A, if Lenny lived an extra 10 years, and B, if he lived in the time of social media, podcasts, daily talk radio shows, shit like that, there may have been a lot of Lenny Bruce material. Like, I think he was a little lucky in the sense that there's not a ton of him out there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have him sounded all fucked up, repeating himself, that kind of shit.
Pancake face.
Yeah.
Missing a nose. And I think that's, TV wasn't really much of a thing yet.
Well,
It was. The fucking Stooges were huge.
yeah, well,
Those were shorts before movies.
he was banned from television.
Yeah.
So he his first appearance, he was a roommate of Buddy Hackett's, which that does not seem
Another great name.
that does not seem like an obvious pair, Buddy Hackett.
No, it doesn't.
But they were roommates, and they started as a comedy duo known as the Not Ready for Primetime Players. I was not able to find if SNL ripped this off, or it was an homage to. They did not seem big enough for Lorne Michaels to be like, I'm going to pay homage to them.
Yeah.
So or
SNL rips everything off.
Well,
They literally just ripped off
Yeah.
KFC.
But it's also possible that was just a complete coincidence. Not Ready for Prime Time doesn't seem like it's a clunky name. Like I don't think it's something you'd steal necessarily.
Well, what did SNL call? They call them the Ready for Primetime Players, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
It has to be.
No, I think they're the Not Ready for Primetime Players as well.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Because they're not on in prime time. That's the whole idea.
All right.
I'm telling you. They're on at
mean,
11:30 on Saturday nights. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you're
that's true. That's true.
aware. What do you say?
I said it has to be an homage.
Yeah.
I would think it's an odd coincidence, but I didn't see Lorne Michaels say that anywhere. Although I imagine, based on time, you would have been a Lenny Bruce fan.
And Lorne Michaels is a student of comedy.
Yeah. So it would seem weird if they didn't know, if it was an accident.
And Buddy Hackett was fucking huge.
Yeah. That's such a weird...
Really fat.
They were boys back in the day. They lived together. I wonder if Buddy Hackett was doing heroin, too. Or if that was after Buddy's time with
If you want to be friends with me, you have to sniff this.
To steal an Artie Lang joke, he must have been putting that shit on cheeseburgers.
Right. So, I guess since we brought up his TV, he was banned from most television. The only way he got on TV was you can find a clip of him on the Steve Allen Show.
Mm-hmm.
He was also on Hugh Hefner's, Playboy After Dark or whatever the fuck it was back in the day. And he was friends with those guys. Yeah. So they would battle with standards and practices to get Lenny on. He had to have everything fully typed out. He would ad-lib a little bit, but it was not, I don't think it was anything crazy over the line. Yeah. But yeah, networks did not want him anywhere near a television set because they didn't know what the fuck he was going to say.
The standards and practices must have been so weird back then.
Well,
must have been like, don't let him say he's a Jew.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to get to some of the words that Lenny got in trouble. But I'll save that for later in the episode. But I want to get back to Honey Harlow and Lenny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had a wild relationship. There was something said about like domestic incidences, which I feel like was fairly common. I don't know if Lenny ever backhanded her, but maybe they got physical back in the day.
You overcooked my steak.
There was nothing too specific on that, but they obviously got heavily involved in drugs together. They divorced in either 55 or 56, but then tried to get back together, rather. They had a 1-year-old named Kitty, and when she was 1, they took a trip to Hawaii, and it was there that the two of them got all kinds of fucked up, and Lenny kidnapped their child and headed back for the States. And Lenny...
Wait, what year was it?
It's 56.
So was Hawaii?
Oh, I just meant the continent.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute.
Continental United States.
Because that could have been a thing back then.
No, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. All right, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt.
But so he kidnapped their kid, and also I passed by. Lenny had his share of legal troubles. There's one hilarious story, but there were some drug-related troubles prior to this, which turned him into an informant. He was a rat. He was a snitch. This Lenny Bruce.
Oh,
but I don't know if he would have lost the respect of the mafia because he did something pretty hilarious. He ratted on his wife. So they asked him, "Where are you getting your drugs?" And he's like, "I get them from her." So she got arrested, and then she turned into an informant. She flipped.
Where are you getting these jokes?
Yeah, so
My husband.
We'll get more into his time as an informant in a bit, but also one of his more hilarious crimes was I don't know if this is when he was married or not, but he went down to Miami and he posed as a laundryman and hit up a few laundry places, and I'm sorry, hit up a few Catholic outfits, churches and whatnot, and said, I'm a laundryman. I'm here to do your clean your cloth. What the fuck is it called? The
clergy.
The hassock?
Yeah, all that shit. I'm here to clean those. And so he would take those, and he would go out and pose as a priest and get people to donate money for the Human Fund, essentially. He was George Costanza well before his time. He made up a charity.
He's a confidence man.
But it was for a real leopard colony. So he researched a real leopard colony and created a fake charity for them and started taking donations. And he made over $8,000, which I feel like at that time was
a lot
nice
of money.
chunk of change. Yeah. So he made over $8,000 before the
literally buy a house back then.
Before the coppers got to him, and then he got off on it because there were a couple things that was a little weird. They couldn't totally prove it back then, and also there was something about the leper colony existing, and him. I think he actually formed the charity. So there was some technicality that he was able to get off on, but I just thought that was hilarious. So he was a shyster. He was a schemer right from the beginning. But that's where I say, like,
It's a carny.
Say shyster.
well, why? What does that mean?
Just be careful with that one.
Is that a racial thing?
He's a member of the tribe.
You can still say that. He,
All right.
he uses terms like that.
I thought that was German for shit.
No, it's Shiza.
Oh,
Oh.
that's right.
So,
You're very up to that.
so,
You know a lot.
so he,
South Park reference.
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I like that while I'm talking, you two have this weird undertone conversation.
Sorry.
Sniping back and forth.
Sniping is a good word.
So Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and things like that kind of portray him as this, see, like old wacky character. But like he was a lowlife, really. You know what I mean? Like I respect the shit out of him. But he was a junkie. He was he scammed people. He got into shit with his wife, you know? Like there's all kinds of shit where like if Lenny Bruce existed today, he wouldn't be allowed to.
He'd be a dirtbag.
And it's an interesting conversation because he was a dirtbag. Yeah. Like there's a lot of his personality that was a dirtbag. But like I don't know, do you think our generation goes too far in policing some of that stuff? Not in literally policing it. Like Lenny was arrested.
It sounds like he was doing actual crimes.
Yes. So, well,
I don't know, man.
Well, no. So what I'm saying is, yes, he was arrested back then, though, where he would be arrested now as well.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, does our generation go way too far in, morally chastising people and judging them? Where like,
Yes.
Today we wouldn't have Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce would not be allowed to exist in 2021 because we would write him off as a piece of shit. Whereas I don't think we give enough to like, people are complicated. Like, people are multifaceted and nuanced.
Well, if you look at Louis, we kind of, no,
his career's thriving right now. You're right. What's the last movie he made? Oh, it's with Joe List in a fucking comedy club that no one will ever
he's
see.
on a tour right now selling out theaters.
Where's he allowed to promote it?
Well, did he get kicked off Twitter?
No, he never had a Twitter. But what I'm saying is, like, no one's going to have him on a show to promote it. Louis C.K. is a weird one to throw at me. He's never had a tough break. He lost $36 million.
No, I know he had a tough
break
break.
He jerked off.
But I'm saying people are willing to have him back. Is I thought was the point.
His fans, not really anyone else.
Yeah, he had to be a Louis fan before.
Yeah.
So Rogan would have him on.
Oh,
of course. But
you're completely missing my point. Lenny Bruce had an audience at this time.
It's like the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah. I mean, Lenny Bruce had an audience back then as well. Like he was allowed to have an audience. But what I'm saying is, we're making the same mistakes.
Well,
like they wrote Lenny off as a ne'er-do-well because he cursed and he used nasty language. What I'm saying is we do a lot of the same morally upright shit now where we judge people and write them off, even though there may be some things that change the world. Like Lenny Bruce changed the way comedy is done. You could argue that someone else would have come and replaced him, but looking back on history, there is no George Carlin, there's no Louis C.K., there's no Dave Chappelle without Lenny Bruce.
But I feel like a character like that was like just an inevitability, just changing sensibilities, stuff like that.
Right. Well, like I said, that Joe Ancus or Ancus, whatever the fuck his name
Joe
is.
Francis.
Yeah. Like that guy did similar type of shit to Lenny.
Yeah.
He just wasn't as big and wasn't as...
He probably just wasn't as good at it.
Wasn't as controversial, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he probably wasn't as good at it. I mean, there's a certain level of talent. I mean, speaking to the times, maybe his jokes don't work now, but back then he was probably better at joke writing than Joe Ancus.
The other thing, the reason Louis is a bad example is on Craig's side and my side, Louis is a bad example because that's like a sexual thing.
Yeah.
Whereas what Lenny Bruce was judged for was saying the word cocksucker. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think people really gave a fuck about drugs.
I don't think people
I'm sure that was used against him at the time.
People probably didn't know that.
A lot of people probably didn't know.
Yeah,
but what people got mad about, the reason Lenny Bruce made headlines was because he said fuck on stage.
But like TMZ's not like publishing his police reports.
Right.
You know,
and that's what I'm saying now.
Access to information issue.
Like, with Norman Lear, we said the same thing, where Norman Lear broke down all these barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Lenny Bruce broke down all these barriers, and we are building them back up.
Well,
how many leaves and sticks can we throw on this path you've blazed a trail on?
Yeah, I don't honestly. I don't even think it's. I don't even think that stuff relates back to a change in culture. I think it's an access to information issue. Like if people knew back then that he was ripping people off wearing a priest robe.
True.
Like they'd be like, oh, I don't know about this guy. why are we listening to this guy talk? But like, when you're talking about like, oh, he does drugs, you're like, all right, he's a funny guy that does drugs, like whatever.
But
I don't know. That's a hard one.
He was also the first comic to do that kind of shit that got notoriety, it seems.
Exactly. Like it's a timing issue, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, some people may not even know what we're talking about when it comes to Lenny Bruce. So where are we? Have I skipped anything, Matt, before I get to some of the legal troubles?
You hit everything, but his first arrest for obscenity?
Obscenity.
Yeah, so where are we at? 1957?
1961.
61 was his first arrest. I think I might have fucked that up. He might have had one before that.
Well, he started in 57. He started getting fired from nightclubs.
Yes, yeah. So I 61. I'm not 100% sure if that was his first arrest or not. But it was definitely his first big one. But I know. So in 57, he got hired to do a string of gigs, like kind of like a residency type of thing, at a nightclub. And the first night he got fired for cursing and doing what Variety magazine, which I didn't realize
Why did he get hired in the first place then?
Because he was popular. And to your point, at that time, people might not have known what they were hiring.
Guess. That's fair.
Oh, this Lenny Bruce is popular. Let's hire him,
It says 1962 is his first arrest.
62, okay. But in 57 is when he got shit canned, and Variety magazine wrote a review up on him that said he was doing blue material. And people were very against that. So that theme kind of led to, I believe the name of his first album was The Sick Humor of Lenny Bruce, which is how he was written up a lot. People said he was sick. They called him a vomic, which I believe is a play on vomit and comic, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. sounds like a Mike joke.
Yeah, not everything has changed in fucking 80 years.
Now we know it's bad.
Yeah. So yeah.
True.
That's when they started writing up that's when he started to get his reputation as this crazy guy that was getting kicked off stage and everything. So tell me about his first arrest.
For obscenity, and then this is crazy that law enforcement started monitoring his shows.
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yep.
so that was his first arrest. Because then
J.
after
Edgar
that,
Hoover situation.
it was
He had two words that would get him pulled off stage, or one of two of a few.
Go ahead.
Schmuck and cocksucker.
Yeah, I said everything from schmuck to cock. So I did not know. Did you guys know that schmuck is Yiddish for penis?
I didn't know it was Yiddish for penis. I knew it was Yiddish.
According to this. So I'm assuming it's evolved. Because now people say, you're a real schmuck, like you're a real idiot.
I think it means like dick.
So, okay, maybe. So, but the way they wrote it up was penis, which is why they were all up in arms about it. But yeah, he would say fuck, and he would use some colorful slurs. Yeah. But at that time, I really don't think that was the issue.
Old hat.
Yeah.
I think it was cocksucker that really got
Yeah, that was probably the one
Yeah,
that
probably.
they had an issue with.
Yeah.
No gay things.
We have some clips of what he got in trouble for, right? These were so some of his clips were filed into evidence. Which Matt,
Yep.
I mean, now like Dave Chappelle's shit is filed into evidence in public court.
Oh, yeah. Can we read the warning on this, though? This is his album cover.
Oh, sure.
It says, warning, sale of this album may subject seller to arrest for violation of the endemic obscenity laws, the sole exception being San Francisco, California, where the community standards may be lower.
So that is a one foul swoop at Lenny and the community he performed in.
Yeah.
But this is what they did to really fuck with Lenny Bruce is they would start to attack the clubs he performed at, where they said they would take away his license. I'm sorry, take away the club owner's license, like the entertainment license, if they allowed Lenny to perform. So it's not just that he was getting arrested on stage; it's that he was being barred from being on stage because people were afraid to even work with him. And that's what you're getting now.
That's a parallel to now, yeah.
Completely. Where I always say the cancel culture shit, like the big stories, whether it's Chappelle or who, I won't name too many topical ones because this will be in a month and a half. But whatever's happening now in cancel culture, whatever the popular thing is not really the big issue. The big issue is we have no idea who hasn't gotten work in the last 5 years because companies won't even go near it.
Right.
Where Shane Gillis gets fired from SNL because of what he said. Now guys who are more mild than Shane Gillis aren't even getting auditions with SNL.
Yeah.
Because now they're saying, oh, fuck that. You have a podcast? We're not going to touch you. We're not even going to do research into it.
See, I even going beyond comedy, look at who advertises on Fox News.
Meaning what?
My Pillow.
No, but like it's weird stuff. It's like, oh, the My Pillow guy, or like catheters.
Well, that might be the audience.
But it's the audience, but it's also
They do get demographics in their ratings.
Demographics, of course, but it's also like you're not getting mainstream advertising.
As much mainstream stuff. Yeah, because they're afraid to be associated
They're
with it.
afraid to be associated with conservatism.
Well,
or
the last
whatever the fuck is
time-
on there, but it does have an impact.
Well, this was
on
oddly
stuff.
progressive.
Oh,
that-
right.
That they were against.
Yes.
Like they were against progressivism.
Well, the whole thing is flipped.
Yeah, right. So
It's come completely back around.
yeah, which is why people do say it'll swing back the other way. Of course. That's not always a good thing because now it's just Lenny Bruce instead of fucking Dave Chappelle that's being silenced.
Right.
So, anyways, yeah, let's hear some of the things that were filed into evidence because Lenny Bruce was being a very bad boy.
And working together. The guy says, there's a place in San Francisco, but they've changed the policy. Well, what's the policy? Well, I'm not there anymore. That's the main thing. Well, what kind of a show is it, man? Well, you know. Well, no, I don't know, man. Like, it sounds kind of a weird show. Well, it's not a show. They're a bunch of cocksuckers, that's all. A damn fag show, and that's... Oh. Well, that is a pretty bizarre show.
I also have to say, the word that we're probably more shocked to hear is not the word that got him in trouble at that time, I don't think. It was cocksucker that they were mad at.
Yeah.
And I mean, we even talked, again, when we talked about Norman Lear, we talked about that scene in All in the Family where they just alluded to sex. Mm-hmm. Like Archie just goes, oh, I know what they're doing as they're walking up the stairs.
Yeah.
And that they wanted to take that out. And that's 15, 20 years later.
It's probably because that's a descriptive word. Mm-hmm. And it's to the point where the other one could mean like several things.
Yeah.
Oh no! I'm what I'm saying is that's kind of what I'm saying. Where like that's how buttoned up they were about sex at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Where the sexual act is
Standards
what bothered them.
So weird. Like look at even looking at like Psycho.
Yeah.
Psycho, it was a big deal that was the first movie that ever showed a flushing toilet.
Right.
Like just the standards and stuff were just so weird back then compared to what we think about now.
Lenny Bruce would make analogies, and he would purposely use things like toilets.
Yeah.
He would say, like, let's say this is a toilet, and he would talk about how dirty a toilet can be. He was talking about his act. He was comparing his act to a toilet, and I think he did that on purpose because it was an offensive thing.
It was shocking.
Like pregnancy was an offensive thing to bring up back then. You weren't supposed to talk about pregnancy. I mean, you saw on TV where couples slept in different beds at the time.
Oh yeah,
because they didn't want to allude to the fact that they slept
Lucy and
together.
Desi.
Yeah, shit like that. So this is the kind of stuff that Lenny was, poking away at. And there's a little more. Let's hear.
Write the letter. Blah, 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 I want this, blah, blah, I want ticket, get a letter back, get an answer back from St. Louis, Missouri. Dear Mr. Bruce, I have received your letter, blah, blah, blah. We have ticket sellers bonded. We charge $2.50 per ticket seller per hour. We would have to have some more details and blah, blah, blah. Yours truly, C.E. Hoxie. C.E. Hoxie. C.E. Hoxie. Hoxie, buddy. C.E. Hoxie from the Criminal Correctional Florida Institution for the criminally insane and beat up a spade fag junkie before he was thrown off the police force and then became a Pinkerton man and was arrested for stooping his stepdaughter. And C.E. Hoxie,
So again, in there, I don't think we're probably more shocked to hear like the racial shit. But I just threw that in there because I knew Craig would enjoy it. Really, what I think got him is like stooping. I think him talking about sex is in that clip like what they found much worse than some of the slurs he threw out there.
Another descriptive one.
Also, like talking about how how a cop is a bad guy. Because that was even a thing until like, oh my God, like all my references go back to like fucking horror movies.
Well, now we'd be applauded.
But
they'd ignore the racial slur to be like, he's dissing a cop.
But back then it was a big deal because the like during even like as late as the 70s, like when the cops and stuff were bad at their jobs, during Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like that was like a big deal.
You know what's funny too is I did not include the clip because the story George Carlin tells is a little. It's not very descriptive. Like you don't even necessarily know it's about Lenny Bruce, but he talks about Carlin was arrested. I think like even before he was a comedian, or certainly before he was a known comic, and got thrown in a paddy wagon, and he was in the same paddy wagon as Lenny Bruce.
Careful. Don't say paddy wagon.
Oh, is that I forgot that's a racial.
That's a slur now too.
Yeah. Well, I'm Irish. I can say.
Yeah,
it.
me too.
So yeah, Carlin's another guy who got arrested for his words and his shit on stage.
Of course.
So it is. What we're experiencing now.
I bet that led to the 730 words.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I would think so.
I also bet that makes a resurgence. People are going to get arrested for shit they say.
Oh,
it's tough. That's a tough one to go back on just with the Constitution.
Yeah,
I mean, that doesn't.
I think
stop
that's a door that's open that the government can't close.
It's tough. That'd be the closest we get to like a civil war.
I mean, you'll like I mean, you'll have like you might have like mobs of people like we do now, like shutting down speakers,
That'll
like,
happen.
screaming over them. I mean, it has happened.
So, I mean, when you talk about influence, they named a couple out, but I think it's fairly obvious if we talk about the coaching tree here, where it's obviously
every comic.
every comic really.
Yeah.
But Carlin, Pryor to a lesser extent because it wasn't as much about social issues with Pryor, I don't think.
Hicks.
But definitely Bill Hicks. Yeah.
It was not on the tree. Brian Regan.
Yeah, you could take Regan and Nate Bargatze and Jerry Seinfeld off of the Lenny Bruce tree. But other than that, it's pretty. Anyone who curses, you can thank Lenny Bruce. But really, you see the obvious influence in Carlin, Louis, and Chappelle. Hicks because of the political stuff, and Hicks is also a guy I don't know as much about. So when we do that episode, I'll be learning.
Yeah. I don't see Hicks being.
I think
Hicks
just
isn't as funny.
just the political shit mostly would be the influence.
He's another one that's just like a preachy guy with like a joke spattered in.
Yeah. But like what Chappelle is doing now with the transgender community and the racial stuff he's always done, and what Carlin did forever. Those are the two I think most glaring influences of Lenny Bruce, no doubt. And I mean, while we're on it, I guess. Revisionist history, I don't think there's anything I would have rather Lenny Bruce do. There's no... he was great because he was never on TV, and he wasn't in movies and things like that. Any revisionist history with him would take away the legend. He would just be another Henny Youngman.
Well, I was going to say, it would also change the course of comedy.
Big time.
Right.
I mean, all these guys, I mean, just by nature of all of these guys citing him as an influence, like we wouldn't have it. I mean, even if you... Technically, if you go back, if he wasn't an influence, he's still like they all look to him as this titan of opening doors and shit.
Yeah, which is like I said, I always thought it was like, oh, you got to name one of the old guys when Rolling Stone puts out their top comics because I never thought Cosby was funny, but Cosby would always be up there, and I'm like, oh, I guess you just had to be alive for that. But it's I don't even. Obviously, Lenny Bruce had an audience that would follow him wherever he went, apparently, even in the fucking dingy clubs he was working and shit.
Yeah.
So obviously people thought he was funny or at the very least interesting. His comedy does not hold up at all.
No.
Because of the things he's talking about. He's talking about topical things. He's talking about specific policemen that arrested him and shit.
Yeah.
But also his cadence and like, hey, daddy-o, hey, man. Like the way he talks is not...
Here's my pal Corduroy Longwater. We go way back.
Hoxie. Like just the shit he's saying does not hold up. So it's hard to go back and listen and be like, this guy's funny. But then once you start learning about him, you're like, oh, the influence is obvious. And his impact on comedy is obvious.
Heavy.
Where now, after having like looked into him a little more, I would argue he's way more impactful than even Pryor and Carlin.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So we have one more clip from the filed into evidence, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so this is a little weird one where, like, keep in mind, I cut like a minute and a half out of this. This was long, but this is sort of the wacky thing. And you'll hear comics talk about how comedy was easier back in the day, which is true and not true. Like, it's ballsy to do this on stage because you could get arrested for it, obviously. But it's also like... Tell me anyone in this room couldn't come up with this sort of this type of gem.
Was this an hour back situation?
It was very similar. Yes, that's a great example. Yeah.
Don't come in me. Don't come in me, me, don't come in me, me, don't come in me.
Oh boy.
Don't come near me, don't come near me. I can't come.
The secret song on a Green Day album.
I didn't think those words
Because
were
you don't
around
love
back
me,
then.
that's why I can't come. I love you, I just can't come, that's my hang-up. I can't come and I'm loaded, all right? Because you don't love me. Just what the hell is the matter with you? What has that got to do with loving you? I just can't come, that's all. Now, if anyone in this room or the world finds those two words decadent, obscene, immoral, amoral, asexual, the words to come really make you feel uncomfortable. If you think I'm rank for saying it to you, the ear of the beholder gets rank from listening to it. You probably can't come. And then you're of no use. Because that's the purpose of life, to recreate it.
So this, like, the reason that doesn't really hold up is because, I mean, like you said, Craig, you didn't think that word was around back then? Mm-hmm. It just wasn't you could never use it in movies or obviously TV or anything.
Well, that was the whole bit, was that he was saying it.
Right. So that's where, like, the same way there's shit when I go back and listen to old Stern or old O&A and stuff from like the early 2000s where you're like, the fuck is this? Like, where it was just funny because they said things you'd never heard on radio before.
Right.
That was a little kid teasing his brother, like, I'm not touching you.
Yeah.
That's what
like,
that was.
but now you listen back, you've heard 10 million podcasts that do this crazier shit where you're like, I don't get why that was funny.
Yeah.
Same thing with Lenny Bruce, where it's like, to us, we've heard the words to come 10 million times. But the idea that anyone was saying them, never, no less singing them and saying people can't come. And it's like, whoa, it blew your mind back then.
It just sounded like a porn.
Yeah.
I'm going to come.
Crazy. Who could believe it?
Don't come in me.
So, that shit was filed into evidence. And then Lenny was not convicted of obscenity for this particular incident. Mm-hmm. But like we mentioned, because of that, he started getting looked into, and they would monitor his shows, and he started getting dragged off stage. This is, I think, a more accurate part of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, where it kind of got to the point where he was taunting people. Like, he would know some of the officers that would come and monitor him, and he would get pulled off stage and shit like that. So he was getting arrested a lot now. But also, like, he was getting arrested for obscenity, but he was also getting arrested for drug shit. And him and his wife, when they were still together, would have, like, orgies and things like that. He had an incident. He got kicked out of Vegas, which is a big deal for a comedian back then.
Right.
But he showed up at a show, and the people there said they could tell he was loaded. And he's all kind of fucked up and talking about tits and ass and everything.
Nice.
And he gets up on stage and sprays the performer and the audience with a fire extinguisher, and like ran out or whatever. And when the cops came to find him after, he and the missus opened the door completely naked, and there were like 6 other people in the background completely naked, and they were just fucking and sucking. Oh, and I forgot to mention about his wife. The other interesting thing was she was bisexual, which I imagine at that time was pretty rare. But I think that also led to a lot of the fun that Lenny had.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day.
I do like how the cops back then were like, all right, we got to tail Carlo Gambino, Vito Genovese,
and Lenny Bruce.
Yeah.
Well, so that a couple things is I don't know that getting arrested back then was as big a deal as it would be now. Like, the reason I brought up that Carlin story is because it was kind of just like, get in the paddy wagon, and we bring you down to the station, and it's no big deal. Whereas now that would kind of like ruin your life or ruin your career, or so it would be a big deal.
Yeah, it'd be a big deal.
Whereas back then it was like, all right, officer, what are you gonna do to me? You know, like you'd have a wisecrack with this guy. It was like a rivalry.
What you doing, Bing? I thought I told you to go fuck your mother.
He's a soprano.
Bing, bow, boom.
But yeah, so him and
Followed like a mobster.
him and Honey Harlow had their fun, and then when they separated, he dated comedians and jazz singers who also had their fun. I guess there was one trumpet player back in the day. I forget the guy's name, but he used to hang with Lenny, and she wanted to swing or something. Honey Harlow wanted, and so the trumpet player who Lenny was friends with was fucking her, and they said Lenny would crawl in the room. And she would go, Lenny, get out of here. Like there was some, you don't think of the 60s that way, but it was a wild fucking time.
Yeah.
It was, I would say, I mean, it's odd because they wouldn't speak about it and you weren't allowed to say the word cocksucker or stupping or allude to sex. But I think like they were more open sexually back then and just more intolerant socially.
Yeah.
Like the way they would talk about things. Like they didn't accept gay people, obviously, but they were all fucking and sucking and doing all kinds of nonsense back then.
I wonder what it was when his eyes got opened up to fisting. Was he like, oh, that's 20 new minutes?
Unfortunately, the sad thing is we can't ask him. You know, if only he could have gotten off the drugs, we could ask him that today. But yeah, so obviously he was getting monitored a lot more, but more drug arrests led to he started going down a real bad road where some of his recordings, I mean, this is how bad he was, that they would note in like his later albums and shit, he sounded lucid, which is never a good sign. You know, if you say about a 38-year-old guy, he sounded lucid, that's not good news. If that's a noteworthy subject.
That's not a descriptor you want in there.
Right. No. Yeah. So things started to get real bad with drugs. There was one time where he was in Miami, I assume performing, and he got arrested for possession down there. Meanwhile, his house got raided, and there were prostitutes living there. So he was getting arrested on up north and down south at the same time.
Lenny Bruce rules.
He's the man. That's what I'm saying. There will never be another Lenny Bruce.
No.
He's the greatest. And then, so there was that first trial, and then there was another obscenity trial that he really got. How are we with time, Matt?
51.
Okay, good, perfect.
Yeah.
So the next obscenity trial, they described as like kind of the OJ trial of the 60s. I mean, obviously there's no court TV. You can't be as
In 66?
but a little before that because he died 64. So like the papers were constantly covering it and fans were showing up in his defense and things like that. Like it got pretty crazy. And what's the next piece of audio, man? I think it's related to that.
It's the clip of why he got arrested.
Okay, so let's hear that.
And the reason for that is that the people in the park didn't ask for that. In other words, you can yell fire in a crowded theater if you're on stage, but don't do it off stage. The theater is make-believe. That's where it's at. And I figured out after 4 years why I got arrested so many times. See what happened. It's been a comedy of errors. Here's how it happened. I do my act at perhaps 11 o'clock at night. Little do I know that 11 a.m. the next morning, before the grand jury somewhere, is another guy doing my act who's introduced as Lenny Bruce in substance. Here he is, Lenny Bruce in substance. A peace officer who is trained to recognize clear and present dangers, not make believe, does the act. The grand jury watches him work and they go, that stinks. But I get busted. And the irony is that I have to go to court and defend his act. Because they only defend the complaint.
So I think that's right. I go defend this guy's act. But again, it's I mean we talk just generally on the Blind Mike Project and Very Good Show. I think this probably comes up. How like if a comedian gets in trouble, boy, how much more funny is it when a white lady on the news reads the transcript of what the comedian said, rather than just playing the clip.
Play the clip.
So
one instance.
Yeah.
There's one instance I found it funny when they read it.
Shane Gillis?
Yes.
Yeah. Gayer than ISIS?
Judd Apatow is gayer than ISIS.
Yeah, that is funnier coming out of a newsman's mouth. But, so, and he's saying there, and it's amazing, 60 years later it holds up, where that is not comedy. And yes, if it's like yelling fire at a crowded movie theater. If you're yelling cocksucker in the park, sure. That's obscene. You shouldn't be doing that. You know, if you're where kids play screaming the F word, that's psychotic, and you should be taken out of polite society. But if you're in a comedy club, particularly one that people are going to, why is that obscene? I don't get it. So that's what Lenny was fighting for 60 years ago, and yet we've kind of reverted course to saying like, you can't say that, even though people are seeking you out to watch you. You're not allowed to say that. So that's if you're wondering, the significance of Lenny Bruce, I think that in a nutshell, that clip sums it up perfectly, like what he was doing. And that was very important to him, obviously. Mm-hmm. However, and this may be in part to drugs, he got all consumed by it. But before I get there, what do we have next on the list here, Matt?
Well, he was barred from returning to the UK.
Oh yeah, so these are good.
Yeah, that's right.
He was kicked out. He was kicked out of the United Kingdom. And what was there an exact reason for that, or was it just general?
No, after performing, he was just removed, and he was labeled.
What was he labeled?
Undesirable.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes, he was labeled as undesirable. And then there's a whole thing. I guess it was a big controversy.
This
Australia.
is great.
Yeah, he's the greatest.
This made me laugh when I read it.
What's that? The England thing or the
Australia one?
So there's a whole controversy in Australia, and this was huge. I don't know. I think it was big here too, to an extent. Like people at least heard about it.
Funny.
And Lenny didn't do a lot of talking about it. But what happened in Australia, man?
So a female heckler stood up and complained that Bruce only talked about America and told him to talk about something different. He replied, "Fuck you, madam. That's different, isn't it?" Which reminds me of the Dice, The Day They Laughed.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Very similar.
But there you go, another influence.
Yeah.
So
fucking
crowd work.
But that's every heckler situation.
Yeah, well, crowd work in general, where maybe guys were doing this before Lenny Bruce, I don't know, but they had such refined acts back then.
Yeah.
And it was all vaudeville type stuff and impressions.
Rehearsed.
Whereas, like, I don't know if you were having a natural... Yeah, I don't know if you were having a fuck you, madam moment before Lenny Bruce. Yeah, fuck you, madam. Is that different enough for you?
That's fucking funny still.
That's funny.
So, he had a few more shows in Australia. They cut them short. Like how he, I don't know if he got paid for them or not, but they banned him from a few. One got recorded, and it was like most of the people were not there because the way this was played up in the media in Australia, people hated Lenny Bruce, and they played it up as this vulgar act and things like that. It was horrible. And so Lenny kind of went out with a whimper, and he recorded it. I could not find that anywhere, but you might be able to. This was kind of the start of his fight against obscenity and the man and shit like that, but almost to his detriment, where it started to become not funny and just a paranoid guy. Like they literally said in the later years of his life, after his later court battle, he had essentially it was like John Nash's apartment. Like he had paperwork up on the walls and legal books in his house. He was pouring through legal documents trying to...
Jim Carrey from 23.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It got crazy.
On a red thread connecting stuff.
And then on stage, he would just read court transcripts and be like, "Can you believe this, folks?" And he's just reading like legalese. So it got pretty weird. He was very paranoid, and a lot of that had to do with drugs.
Yeah.
I'll get into is there anything before, what do we have left, Matt?
His severe drug use during the last decade.
Yeah.
And he was arrested for drug possession in California. You said that.
Yep. I mentioned Hugh Hefner earlier. He had an autobiography that was published by Playboy. So those were the types of like outlets that would help Lenny Bruce, like that, because NBC wasn't having him on, obviously. Although Steve Allen did have him on a couple times, but he was only on television 6 times in his career. Which, even though he was only crazy popular for 6 years, let's say 7 years, but 7 years is a long time. Like we talked about Rodney, he did Ed Sullivan 50 times in that span.
Yeah.
And Carson and shit like that.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, 7-year run.
There you go. Exactly. The exact same. 2 men of similar ilk.
Yeah.
Tore down the same amount of barriers. So yeah, shit like that was happening. But then this legal battle consumed his life, and the last few years were not great for the old L man, and it was drug fueled and fueled by paranoia as well. And then he died in '66. So he was found guilty of the case in '64, and then he appealed it. And during the appeal is when he really got deep into the legal books and shit like that, and also got heavier into drugs. And during that time, he got super depressed and died of a drug overdose before the case was overturned. Now, I think like 6 months after he died, or 18 months, I think, after he died, the case ended up getting overturned. So I guess in the history books, that's good. That's like, it's like Aaron Hernandez's fucking case being reversed. What's the difference?
He'd be kicked out of the Navy too.
Yeah, right. He certainly would be. Or so he claims. I think it was all for sympathy. But yeah, so Lenny Bruce got very depressed at the end of his life, and it's like it was interesting. I was listening to Sam Morrill and Mark Norman talk about Chappelle, the shit that Chappelle was going through with his special that got a lot of heat, where they say, like, yeah, this guy's like, Chappelle's super rich and has plenty of money, and we all look at that and say, like, he's fine. What's he complaining of? Like, he's not getting canceled, he's fine. But you don't like take into account the toll that being called a hunk of shit by the media day in and day out weighs on you.
Take on you.
And Lenny Bruce didn't have millions of dollars either. Fame was a lot different in the 60s.
Yeah.
So you kind of have a point where, like, back then no one even took depression into account either.
Well, being a fake clergyman sounds like a nice payday.
It was $8,000, not too bad.
Back then?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was a very sad end for Lenny Bruce. Yeah. And then the craziest part is, like I said, he was an informant, and the people he would rat on, like, he would kind of brag about it. And the officer that was working with him said, "Hey, Lenny, we're starting to hear that you're an informant," meaning the officer obviously knew. But like on the streets where the name Lenny Bruce is coming back to us, and we're not telling people that. So are you telling people that you're an informant? He goes, what do I care? So he was just telling everyone that he was ratting on people who he was and he said, he goes, maybe if some of those people go away, I won't be doing heroin anymore. So that was his logic, I guess. So
that's wicked funny.
So all of that to say, that was a very long way of saying that he died of a drug overdose, and by all accounts, it was accidental. He died with a needle in his arm. However, it's discussed that the batch of heroin the particular batch that he died on was tampered with or something.
Fentanyl?
Possibly.
No.
Back in the day, yeah. And also, like I said, he was a candidate for suicide, obviously.
Candidate.
Well, that's how they phrased it, yeah. I'm running for I've been doing that for 20 years. Running for suicide.
Suicide 2024.
With your vote, folks, I might pull it off.
How tall is this window?
So yeah, there is some gray area around Lenny's death, but I mean, let's face it, he was a heroin addict for 10 years, so who knows? But
he was murdered. See,
it's possible, yeah. But yeah, very sad end for Lenny. But his impact, I would say, is far greater now than it was then. Like we said, there's no even the PC bullshit you see on Netflix. Like, you don't see Hannah Gatsby screaming about her rape if it's not for Lenny Bruce.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, honestly.
He was a real Vincent Van Gogh type.
Yes, he certainly was. He certainly was.
I don't like
a tortured artist.
I don't like that. That was an example of Lenny Bruce's influence is Hannah Gatsby.
Oh, Hannah Gatsby.
Well, what I'm saying is it ranges from Chappelle and Carlin to people like Hannah Gatsby. Like, legitimately, as much as Hannah Gatsby wants to shit on Chappelle or Kevin Hart or whoever she shits on.
They're from the same school.
There is no Hannah Gatsby without the guy yelling cocksucker on stage 60 years ago.
All right, so now I'm rethinking getting rid of him.
Well, you know. So people come with the good and bad, I guess, is the lesson of Lenny Bruce. But he was the fucking man, in my opinion. He was the greatest. They don't make him like that anymore, for real.
No.
Maybe you think if we do heroin, we'll be more likable.
You certainly, yes.
Yes.
Because you'll be asleep more.
All right, boys. I think that's a good place to go, unless you got anything else.
Nope.
All right. Well, go listen to a very good show where these guys are on.
Yeah. See?
Like I said, we're recording this in Vaulted Podcasts. So if you want your podcast to sound a little better, come on down to Vaulted Podcast. Very cool setup Matt has here in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So make the drive down, or if you're in the area, stop on by and hit up at Matt from RI on Twitter, and he'll hook you up.
I think you need an appointment first. Don't just stop on by.
Oh, there's a website where you can make an appointment.
I said hit him up on Twitter. Yeah. I didn't give the address. What's the website, Matt?
VaultedPodcastRI.com.
Probably should have been saying that the whole time, but check that out.
It's all good. Twitter is just as good.
So check out Matt from Rhode Island. Check out a very good show. And hit up the Patreon, patreon.com/blindmike. You'll get these episodes a week early, as well as
$10 tier.
As well, yes, on the $10 tier, as well as for as little as $1 a month. You can get all live streams, and $5 tier gets you pretty much everything else, the TV time capsules and Blind Mike Project and all that type of shit. So go check that out. TV time capsule is basically what we're doing here, but just with bad television.
Yes.
So if you like this and you like TV, check that out. And we'll talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?